Well, with the hubbub of a full expansion release now kind of winding down, I can find the time to start doing some Q&As, and in particular, I wanted to do a super Q&A, which I haven't done for a long while. So if people don't know, to help run the channel, or in fact entirely to run the channel and to be able to sustain doing this, I have a Patreon campaign where you can help to support me and get various perks. One of those perks, in addition to like early access videos and podcasts and so forth, one of them is you can ask me questions in these big long videos, these super Q&As. They can be about anything, and I will do my absolute best to answer it and answer it in full. So it's kind of a guaranteed way to get in there instead of wrestling with hundreds of other comments as we see on the regular Q&As. So I do have a bunch of post Path of Fire questions from Patreon here, which I'm quite excited to get into. So let's see what people have got for us, shall we? Starting from the very top, we have Panot, who says, "Hey WP, I have two questions. First of all, I just bought a new computer to play Path of Fire and played the game too much, so my wrist hurts. I always use a computer for my day job as well, and that means I don't have much time to rest. I'd like to ask you how you take care of your wrist. And then secondly, what's the spec of my computer?" Okay, so the spec of my computer you can find in the About section of my channel page or on Twitch or anywhere. As to this wrist thing, this is kind of weird to me, and you scare me a little bit because, yeah, most of my recent life, I've been working around or on PCs. And I very much remember from office places being drilled and drilled and drilled about, correct desk usage and correct sitting posture and correct typing and so forth. Because obviously, when you're an employee of a company, you're an asset to that company, and they don't want you getting carpal tunnel. They don't want you getting tennis elbow if you're a chef or whatever else. So I remember there was some real hysteria about this, and I've never properly worked on the way I sit at this keyboard or use things. And if I think about it, yeah, whether I'm making videos or playing games, I'm at the PC doing stuff with a mouse and keyboard. So now you kind of have made me realize, no, I've had no issues right now. No, I've put no effort into making sure I have no issues. However, I'm now doubtlessly sure that when I'm like 40, 50, I'm going to get hit with some crippling issue with one of my limbs, and I'll only have myself to blame. So yeah, sorry, I don't really have any advice for that. Just probably listen to what there's millions of guides for out there online. Moving on, Thalandor46 says, "With the festival season coming up, what do you think about the current state of festivals in the game? Given the quality of content we've seen recently, do you think it's a good time to expand on some Mad King / Winter's Day / Lunar New Year / Super Adventure Box lore? Or would you rather see the devs maintain their current pacing with a primary narrative and leave festivals as they have been for the past few years?" You know, I feel so many things when it comes to this topic. And first and foremost, the thing that really strikes me is that it's 2017 and we're still talking about this. And for years and years and years, there's been this air of the devs just trying to automate all of that stuff so that they don't have to work on it very much. And they know that they'll disappoint, established players a little bit, but the festivals are good enough for new players. And I can kind of get behind that. But, even just this year, we were still hearing about, how they've added this extra stuff to the instances so a build doesn't need to be pushed, and presumably they're like tapping into the guild decoration style system thing, where we can see that suddenly the decorations, the Halloween decorations in this case, not guild decorations, the Halloween or the Winter's Day decorations can just ding in. We had that whole thing where we saw that the new Heart of the Mists was added to the game pre-built in with Halloween and Winter's Day variants. So, with all of that in mind, maybe we can say now, the devs won't touch these festivals, they'll leave them, and that will just all be automatic, and we can go back to getting current events, because as far as I'm aware, it's the current events team that's doing all of those things. Maybe we can say that. Or maybe we could say, well, now that they've got everything baseline super automated, as they've always aimed and wanted to have, now that they've got that, that's freed them up to expand on the festivals. And so when we get into this line of thinking, whether it's the right line of thinking or not, I don't know what the toss-up there is. Do I want current events or do I want expanded festivals more? I'm not sure. But when we go into that world, there are some exciting things, definitely. People have been asking me about how Living World Season 4 might start. And in particular, when we look at Joko, the idea that Joko's lost in the mists, I think it is incredibly exciting to consider that at Halloween, Joko might, released from his prison, go to find the Mad King who he has prior history with. Not particularly pleasant history, but has prior history with, and kind of hitches a ride to Tyria on Mad King's Day. That would be brilliant. I think that could be a great opportunity for the expansion to segue into something fresh on Halloween, to segue into Season 4. And, you know, that's not lost on me. Then there's Super Adventure Box 2, and I have a bit of a story on this too. Last year, when we were looking for the new SAB patch to come out, I really had become quite obsessed with the idea. Well, not quite obsessed, but I quite enjoyed the idea that they'd secretly been working on World 3. I liked the idea so much that I produced a video about it. And, you know, all the current events team's been missing, and Josh Foreman was working on this release, and now he's sort of, you know, perfectly timing because we were waiting for Flashpoint, which was the next one that he was working on. And, you know, all the little pieces seemed to leave space, and some data mining stuff that we'd seen that had never made it into SAB. Could it be that World 3 was coming? And I was interested enough in this topic that I made a video on it that only people on Patreon could see. Because I wasn't sure, with the audience I've now got, whether it was a good idea putting such a speculative kind of production out there. Because people can be hyped by ideas, and then if the devs didn't do it, everyone would have been let down, and I could have got some egg on my face from that. So I kind of produced this video, but I released it in a weird way. And in the end, World 3 obviously didn't come, and I can't deny that wasn't a disappointment to me. I think that there's a lot of really rich stuff in SAB, and it's so strange because I wasn't that fanatical about SAB. I really wasn't. But I have noticed, not just the most recent year, but about the past 18 months, I've really been nostalgic about SAB and really wanted to go back there when it's not on. And I love the idea of a World 3, I really do. It seems from ArenaNet's perspective, you know, they came out with those early things and said, look, we've got it in there as a festival now. It's so hard to develop on, let's ignore it for a bit. And then they followed through on that this year. They kept to their word, they ignored it. So I don't know. I would like to see development on those things. But is it the best thing for the game, and is it even relevant us talking about it anymore? Those questions are a little bit harder to nail down. I would say, I guess out of all of this, Winter's Day I really don't have many thoughts on. And also, have you guys noticed how the community has almost entirely shifted away from thinking about new festivals, right? Like, you sometimes hear people asking for the Jubilee, but it used to be we had people asking for Metoberfest and all kinds of stuff, and now everyone just knows that's, you know, we're never going to get those before the devs find a way to continuously update the festivals. But are they beholden to continually update the festivals just because they exist in the game, when it's such a big game with so many different moving parts? Oof, we could go on for quite a while, but there you have it. Moving on, Ankit Mahatma has a question, and it's spoiler-laden for what it's worth. I don't know whether much of this video will be spoiler-laden, because I don't know the content of the questions coming up, but this one at least is. So a little warning. Well, I'm going to stop warning people about this kind of stuff soon, but here we go. So hello, WP. I hope you're doing well. My first time asking here, so here goes. What are your thoughts on this particular statement from the story of Cormier? She says, no, he isn't. Balthazar has been stripped of his claim and title. He is no longer one of the six. Like, was he already replaced, or is he supposed to be replaced now? I don't expect this in the Super Q&A, because I'm guessing that will be spoiler-free, but looking forward to your story videos. No, you're asking for a Super Q&A, you're getting the Super Q&A answer. Love from India. So, yeah, this is a great topic, and unfortunately, you guys are going to see me double up on this, because there's a video on its own, a really exciting video on its own. There's a lot of things that Path of Fire did that the more I look back, I'm like, was this good? And a lot of it, sadly, revolves around Balthazar. And it revolves around the developers, or the writers, I should say, fear, it seems, to have done really tangible, like, given us progress on the God story. Like, they basically reiterated the God story and gave us slightly more context for certain things, but not too much, right? Like, they were very, it seems to me, timid to touch that subject material. And, you know, I don't blame them for being timid. I think I'd be timid in their position. But one of the more interesting things that came of this, despite some of these reservations I'm slowly developing, one of the interesting things that came of this is the whole Balthazar losing his power thing. Now, one target of potentially terrible writing is this. They, in the same moment, declare to us that, one, the gods won't help us fight the Elder Dragons, and their example is because when we fought a god, it did loads of damage to the world, so we can't do it. And then with the same breath, they casually just mention that they stripped Balthazar of his power against his will and chained him up. So, like, they totally gloss over, essentially, another Abaddon war. Except this time, it was Balthazar that was on the outs. And they gloss over that. They don't talk about it at all. Now, you might argue, oh, well, that happened in the Mist, so that's why it wasn't destructive. But it would have been destructive to the Mist, and I think that no matter what way you cut this and try and wriggle out of it, Path of Fire needed some dialogue talking about that being a serious event. Either that, or this Lissa stuff, and the reason why Balthazar was so, mildly chained up as opposed to Abaddon's prison. Answers to this being something to do with Lissa pending. This could be seen as quite bad. But if we keep looking at that area, you'll also realize something else. They've already stripped Balthazar of his power. At the end of Path of Fire, we see Aurene takes a bunch of Balthazar's magic, and Kralkatorrik takes a bunch of Balthazar's magic. And we, the community, might look at that and say, wow, Kralkatorrik just got like a god, and Aurene just got part of a god. But they actually didn't, did they, guys? All that Balthazar had in him at that point was magic from a bloodstone, which was originally gathered from Tyria anyway, thanks to the Seers, okay? Which is regrettable that now finally an Elder Dragon has acquired Bloodstone magic, but that's what he's got. And also whatever magic came from Flashpoint and the machine that was in play there. That's what was actually distributed. That's what we were fighting against through all of Path of Fire. We weren't fighting against a god power in Path of Fire. We were fighting against a god character, but his power was Bloodstone power, and his power was the machine. And what he'd taken from Primordus and Jormag. And so, all of this in mind, you have to look back and realize that actually, Balthazar's real power, the real god power that he had, that was already stripped from him in the Mists. And then there's a question of, okay, so we glossed over the war, but more importantly, we've glossed over who took that power. Where is that now? And there's a fun suggestion out there that maybe he has already been replaced. Balthazar wasn't replaced by Kralkatorrik and Aurene. It's not Aurene, the god of war, and Kralkatorrik, the god of war. That just doesn't work at all. But potentially, there was another very real, tangible replacement that's out there somewhere. And then we get into other fun speculation territory, like Magus, like a certain mortal that was in the Fissure of Woe in the first game, and all other stuff. But again, I want to do a whole video on this, so we'll be dealing with that then and there. I doubt there'll be that much more information than I just gave you guys here, but there you have it. It's interesting, isn't it? Next, we got Frederick Hoffman, who says, hey, WP, I generally think that the Path of Fire story's been really good, but there have been some parts that really disappointed me. One thing is when we meet Cormyr and we just get that blinded condition. I don't know, it felt as a bit lackluster. I can understand that permanently blinding the player character is impossible, but I was still disappointed. Also, that there are so many unclear things about Balthazar. How did he get the mirror? How did they manage to chain him up without a fight scene, since Cormyr mentions such a fight would be disastrous, and so on. Or that Ritlock's time in the Mist is handled in one small cutscene and a bit of dialogue. What do you think about these points, and are there similar points to you? Questions like this are always funny to me because it just seems like people want to vent, right? I get it though. Sometimes I want to vent. Yeah, I've already talked about a lot of that subject material, so I guess we don't have to go over it again. The mirror stuff though, yeah, I would have expected Path of Fire to give it to us. I hope that Living World Season 4 gives us more information about that stuff. I, yes, was disappointed that Ritlock was boiled down to a single small cutscene. But not disappointed in a terrible way, just that I thought, that could have been a good experience to explore in the Mist. What I'm more disappointed in with the Ritlock side of things is not that it was a small cutscene, but it's actually that we never got anything to do with Rurik and like real detail on Sahothim and the actual the stuff to do with the ghosts in Ascalon. Now I know to pilfer a term here, that would have randomized the story to suddenly be talking about the Foe Fire again and to suddenly be talking about the ghosts of Ascalon. But that is why Ritlock was in the Mist. That is what triggered all of this. And that original mystery of why does he have Rurik's sword when we last saw it had been left by Rurik's undead body on the Fire Island chain. All of that stuff I think was good territory for the Mist stuff to talk to us about. And in a lot of ways, that cutscene we got in Path of Fire just moved the goalposts. What it actually did was it said, okay, don't worry about anything that happened in the Mist anymore. Let's just pretend it was always about Balthazar. And I don't know about that. So, yeah, then you talk about the blinded condition. On this front, I can't agree with you. I think the blinded condition was more than enough. Like, what do you want? Like, let's actually stop for a second. This is like the players in Nightfall who were saying, oh, I can't believe Cormyr became a god. I'm supposed to be the god. Okay, all right, let's be logical for a second. What do you want them to do here? The best they could have done is have some dialogue from Cormyr at the end of the instance saying, oh, don't worry, you're not blind now. But I am a believer that a line like that has to be written with such finesse in order to not feel weird and clunky, and written as just an obligation to satisfy the blindness story, which was not relevant in the library. I am of the belief that if it's too clunky, they can get away with not having it there. I saw the blind thing. I'm not expecting much, and I'm happy that they did it. And, you know, we heard on the AMA, they almost didn't even do the blind thing. So, Christ, I'll take what I can get. Next, we got Jarvalnus, who says, or Jarvanius, since I really like your Let's Plays, is there anything you're planning after the Guild Wars 2 expansion hype settled down a notch, or is it realistic to think the instant release of the next Living World season will keep you on your toes for the next few years? And more importantly, any plans on what games you're going to tackle next, except your insane idea of a full-on Elder Scrolls Let's Play, of course, considering your prep work for your Let's Plays will most likely keep that project in the woodworks for the next 20 years. Oh, he's spoken with such truth. Oh, it stings, but it's so true. One thing I really need to do is become okay with not knowing everything, and that I promise that's not like some kind of a weird humble brag, because I think I never hit that ideal, but I feel like my videos aren't worth anything unless I know it all, and especially when it comes to Let's Plays. So then what this means is I have to pick my projects very carefully. And the Elder Scrolls is insanely intimidating because it only takes me a couple of seconds to realize there's X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F fact that I didn't know. I got really far with my Elder Scrolls prep, and then I made the mistake of watching, what was it, Summer Games Done Quick, I think? And I was watching speed runs of the entire anthology. And when I watched those, it completely debased me and my confidence that I understood the games, because the techniques and the tactics and the deep underlying understanding of mechanics and bugs that were expressed through those speedruns was on another level, a level I didn't even really anticipate. And it was all fascinating to me. It was all so interesting. If you guys want to kill some hours, watch some of these like anthology speedruns of the Elder Scrolls series, especially the earlier games, which I've been playing a lot of. I've played a lot of Arena over the past year, and it debased me because I was like, oh my god, all of this is amazing. I want to share all of this. I want to show every moment of my series. I want to say, oh, we could do this, which is the way that the devs want us to do it. Or I could talk about this bug and this bug and this bug and this bug and all these other things that you can do and how quickly you can complete the game. Oh, maybe I should add an episode to the LP where at the end I speedrun the whole thing so I can show you that this like 50 episode long thing can actually be done in like 20 minutes. Won't that be amazing for people? And then I feel myself like spiraling down, and I'm realizing I'm now planning to become like a speedrunner of one of these games. It's like, no, that takes too long. So, you know, I have these real issues, these real terrible issues. However, you're asking me what LPs I have on the horizon. It is that. And I think to take it back to the start of my answer to this question, I need to learn to be okay with not knowing it all. Yeah, and I do want to put that out, and I have been making more progress on it just this week. I don't think just because Guild Wars 2 is pushing Living World faster now, and we've got this amazing content cycle, that should stop me doing all other things. I actually think that's kind of, and I mean, I know most people listening to me right now only care about my Guild Wars opinions and Guild Wars, but when I come to the very real reality of this is kind of a career for me now, when I think of that, I do realize, you know, I can't always be about Guild Wars. I do have other passions that I want to share. So I need to find space in my life to produce Guild Wars content as rich and frequent as it is. I need to find time to produce that and push the boundaries and pursue other projects and things like Concrete Ducks and stuff. So it is something that I'm looking at, and it's just a matter of scheduling and workflow and my own psychology with how much time I give myself each production and how long before I'm confident in a production and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm sure I'm being a bit too abstract with my answer here. Yes, Elder Scrolls, and there are other games as well. It's a shame that Almost Human seem to have sort of disbanded, it seems, or they're not doing very much. They've got there's like another game under another company that has some of them. I would have loved to have continued Grimrock style stuff. I know that the genre did have a bit of a resurrection lately. Then there's also Final Fantasy 2 and FF12, the remaster. I've always said when that comes to PC, I'd like to do it on PC with you guys, and you might well still see that. That's another behemoth of a game though, so we'll hold it still. Not too much new information here, but hopefully you understand a bit of what's going on my end. Next question. Steph Bohm says, do you think that we'll be going south to Corner or Istan? It's on Shaman's map, but the appearance of primarily Istan-based characters like First Spear Devad and even of a second spear sanctuary. Makes me feel like ArenaNet put those in Path of Fire because they don't think they'd be able to show their proper locations. Wow, that's quite cynical. I can understand where your impression comes from there. No, I think we will be going. Damn, I think we'll be going. Istan is a very rich area, and I'm looking forward to returning to Istan. And, you know, if that end cutscene shows us anything, it's Kralkatorrik moving south, right? That's what they said on the AMA. I know the sun suggests he was actually moving, what was it, supposed to be east? But no, I think that we will be going there, definitely. Does that mean we'll be going in a beeline? Does that mean every single update of Season 4 is going to be more progression, dry top style into a new Cornan map, and the entire region is one map? Because remember, Vabi was given to us in one map, so would Corner be one map and then it was just slowly unfolded to us? Or are we going to go to lots of other places? I guess that's something we'll have to see what the devs do, but I am pretty confident, yeah. We'll be going to Corner, we'll be going to the Grand Cataract. You know, as Joko comes deeper into the story, yes, that means more desolation and Bone Palace and stuff, absolutely. I actually think, you know how Ratanovus was kind of the central hub we return to all the time in Heart of Thorns? If we were going to have an equivalent, surely the Bone Palace would be a good one. And if they write Palawa Joko in the way I want them to, he's not just going to be an out-and-out antagonist the entire time. So I think that, yes, Joko means the Bone Palace and stuff, but I also think that going back to Corner and go back to where he was defeated by Chirai and stuff, that also leads to some pretty juicy situations, and that's in Corner, and then Istan beyond too. Obviously, long term, we're all excited about the idea of keep going south till we hit the coast, and then keep going south across the coast to Cantha, where we find these xenophobic assholes that are about to kill the deep sea dragon and we have to stop them or something. But, you know, that's going to be a ways away, I would suppose. Next question is from Jasmine McGovern, who says, do you think that they should add more collection achievements to the game? I think it would be awesome for everyone to see what they can get. To see what you can get? What do you mean? Collections for core Tyria stuff? Certainly, I think there's a lot of space for more collections. I think that the more that they add, the worse the UI gets. Maybe they can break down a couple of new categories as well. But I think they do a lot of collections. Minis, specifically, are the place where I feel like I've wanted more. I wanted like a collection for all of the Living World Season 3 minis, for example, because that would have been a huge karma sink for people, and it would be nice to get like some final mini as a reward at the end of that, or a title at the end of that, or something like that. There's certain things about rewards that they could overhaul. And POF as well actually had a lot of minis as rewards too, which I think could have been a collection. I was quite struck by Path of Fire not having many basic collections. Like, they did a lot of rare collections this time, and to me, they were not rare collections. Rare collections, originally and for a long time, were preserved as being genuinely difficult things to do. And in Path of Fire, they've just totally removed that sense of them, in my opinion, because so many of them are just like normal, standard things you'd experience in the expansion. They're not like elite goals. They're not like long-term goals. It's just like something you get a lot of. Like, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, most of the stuff to get the Griffin, they put as rare collections. A rare collection to go around and press F on a couple of eggs, as opposed to some of the stuff we had from rare collections back at launch. I mean, that's lunacy to me. But yeah, more collections, I suppose, would be nice. You have to be careful not to do so many that people feel overwhelmed. I have an interesting thing where I mostly care about collections only after I have a lot of them, and there's just a couple more left to finish the whole list, and that already means that I have to be in a very extreme completionist mode before I really start caring about them, and I wonder how many other people feel that way. Next question is from MMJ's Clark, who says, hey WP, been enjoying all the Path of Fire videos. Could you perhaps speculate on the futures of Zodja and Logan? I can't imagine we would see Logan during this upcoming Living World season. What do you think we could or should expect for his character? And Zodja being MIA for so long, how on earth do we get her back in the story? You also follow up this saying maybe it should just be a large Living World speculation video. But we can answer it in brief. I think that Logan does have a lot of place in the story. As the leader of the Pact, I was kind of curious looking back now that he really didn't have much of a role to play in Path of Fire as the leader of the Pact. But maybe that's sort of more of a slow burner and something they'll look at when we genuinely get back to Elder Dragon fights. I think Path of Fire was kind of scared to touch on the Pact because the Pact is kind of a thing all about fighting dragons. And there's kind of a scene that needs to happen, post-Flashpoint. There's a scene that needs to happen where we are directly, diplomatically communicating with those people and explaining, okay, we're not going to be killing them anymore. And right at the start of POF, they like sort of allude to it a bit. If I remember the character on the airship saying, oh, I don't know how I feel about us defending Elder Dragons, but, you know, when I look back at One Path Ends, if it's this idea of, like, being a bonus episode, and they're like, okay, what do we do? They obviously settled some richer, sort of deeper lore things, like bringing Livia back and so on. But I actually think it was kind of One Path End's duty to give us a scene with Logan, where maybe even Logan doesn't like us too much, but we sort of convince him and we bring him around because he respects us or whatever. It's a conversation that needed to be shown on screen, I think. But anyway, yeah, when, and I'm sure that Guild Wars will do this, when we get back to killing dragons, because we've got suitable replacements in Aurene, in Shiny, in whatever. When we get back to fighting dragons and Ritlock can, you know, boast about being right that we shouldn't have destroyed the spear and so on, that's when I think Logan can have a big role. As for Zodja, you know, they've said Felicia Day herself tweeted a while ago that she would love to go back and do more VO. I think they just need to craft things in a way that she can be very relevant. We are still around Glint's Lair, so maybe she can go there and get that closure and go recover Big Snaff or something. Time will tell, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Anyway, yeah, I'll give you more of a comprehensive thing in a dedicated video. William Hawkins says, WP, how does human culture respond to Balthazar's death? How do they view the commander? Will some gods rise to replace Balthazar? Well, I think that if a god is going to rise to replace Balthazar, it's already happened. And it might have happened off screen, and it's happened somewhere in the mists, and now they're away. They're not in the Fissure of Woe and so forth. Perhaps if the next raid deals with the Fissure of Woe, as many have speculated, we could be looking at this kind of information. As for how the humans view him, you know, Path of Fire went into this a reasonable amount, particularly the Zacian. And I wonder whether they are going to be kind of the poster boys for those who love Balthazar now. We already see Marjorie and Casimir like make up at the end of the story, so whatever this sort of tension and conflict, religious conflict that was going to be between them, I think was kind of not a thing in the end, just because the two of them weren't exploring the desert together. They might have bounced off of one another a lot more if that had happened, but instead they made it into this thing where it was like, oh, they've broken up and they're on hiatus kind of thing while they're out in the desert. Now, for me, I quite enjoy that because I wasn't really looking forward to a Marjorie x Casimir breakup story myself. So I like the way they did that in Path of Fire, but it does mean we got a little bit less of this human perspective of the people still loyal to Balthazar. And yeah, I'd anticipated there's the Zacian that still care a lot about that. You know, going back to this idea that, are we going to keep going south and south and south? In theory, it would be Corner Istan, Ocean, and the Battle Isles before Cantha, and then we're dealing with a stronghold of the Zacian. But then there was the whole flooding, and did Path of Fire ever talk about... Did the Zacian and Path of Fire ever talk about the Battle Isles? I don't think they did. So yeah, interesting things to think about. You also ask me, how do they view the commander? Well, if they love Balthazar, they probably hate the commander, don't they? That priest that we saw in One Path Ends probably hates us now, but it's okay because he was largely comic relief, as many of them seem to have been. Moving on, Joris DeVos says, hey WP, I've been a fan since 2012. Dude, that's awesome. 2012. It's like not many people watched me in 2012. I'm always incredulous when I hear that because I started around Halloween of... Oh, wait, was it 2012 or was it earlier? No, I'm lying to you. I'm thinking of 2010. Christ, to be getting older. Anyway, thanks, dude. I know you never believe me when people tell you this, but yeah, well, it's true. I found you looking for help getting through Guild Wars 1 as soon as possible before Guild Wars 2 launched. I realized I sucked at buildcraft and general micro/macro managing, so I ended up watching quite a bit of your LP and Guild Wars 2 hype videos. Me finding you was a result of wanting to find out about the lore, and your not adding to the pile stance made you my only option. So what he's talking about there, guys, is when I started on YouTube, and I still believe this, if you want to build a channel that does something or has some kind of a following, you should try to not add to the pile. Try to do something that's different, fill a niche that hasn't been filled yet. And for me, when I got into the Guild Wars scene, it was the fact no one on YouTube gave a crap about the story. All the Let's Plays, all the coverage of this game completely glossed over the story. There was not a culture for caring about lore and story. There were some fanatics, but generally speaking, it was like all MMOs in that the story was secondary. It was something to skip the cutscene. It was something to skip the walls of text and not care about. And I identified that it was actually quite good. So I took the time to learn about it and share it with people. Anyway, he says, what I'm realizing here, this is just kind of an introduction to their time on Patreon, and it's a lovely long paragraph, but I'll skip it for the sake of everybody else. Thank you so much for the kind messages there, and especially that you've remembered certain things about me getting addicted to League and the casual playing of Pokemon and so forth. Will you, as a general RPG fan, MMO RPGs, JRPG, Western RPG, not eventually cover The Witcher 3? I know it's been said 1,001 times, and that's great, but these series are so you. The books/world building are so fucking great, games with Witcher 3 being regarded as one of the, if not the best RPG out there. I know you don't want to add to the pile, but I've searched and a good lore series playthrough covering everything does not exist in a good way, not like you did for FFX and stuff. I know it's on the table probably, but one can hope for it to be here in the next 2 years, or will it be something you'll only find time for after Guild Wars 2 or something extreme? So I'm a little bit cynical as to what you said there. I think that because Witcher 3 is so big and is so broadly and widely covered by so many different people, there has to be a quality series out there on it. I do think certain games reach a saturation point, and in terms of as being a content creator, I really am not sure whether what you're saying can be right. And neither do I really have it in me to browse through all the videos and try and find it. So the series itself, as a human being, as a fan, I really do. I know that The Witcher 3 is up my alley. It's a lot like Souls, right? I know that that's up my alley. I know that the way it tells its story and its gameplay, that these are things I would enjoy, that these are things that I could play and get very enthusiastic about and want to share with you guys. But I also do feel like that ship has sailed, especially on Souls. I had so many people telling me to play the Dark Souls series for so long, back when it was like in its infancy, and I brushed it all off. I think that Witcher, though, is kind of as great as it is and as much love as you've probably got for it and you want me to play it. I'm not denying that I might play it as a fan at some point, but at some point I have to think, okay, how big is a project? How likely is it? With for like the next 2 years, I really don't think you'd see me playing Witcher 3 on the channel, because yeah, I'd be going back to Witcher 1. In fact, I've started playing Witcher 2 like 3, maybe 4 separate occasions now, and always ended up getting taken away because of other stuff. And you know, I'd want to do it. And also, yeah, there's books and comic, isn't it? Like, it's a Polish comic, isn't it? Is that what it is? I mean, I really don't know very much right now. But yes, I know a great many fans of Witcher. I know that Witcher 3 was really phenomenal, and it is something I want to play. It's on my gaming bucket list, if you will. But as WoodenPotatoes, is it something you'll see? I really hate to let you down, but unfortunately, I think not. Anyway, it's great to see you here, and thanks for all the lovely comments, like genuinely really lovely comments. I hope to see more questions coming up. Next, we got Bavrista, who says, "Hey WP, I found and loved your behind the scenes series." Ooh, advertisement, super secret behind the scenes series that's only available for top tier Patreon supporters, being shouted out right there. Are you planning any additions to those? Maybe you want to add Twitch or other things to the mix? Yeah, so how many episodes was that series in the end? Like 7, I think, in the end? There are further things that I'd like to go into. Like, when I've upgraded software, I've been like, maybe I could update the behind-the-scenes series. I also think I left that series on a lingering note of there could be another episode or 2 or even 3 dealing with not technical production and matters of software and workflow, but instead dealing with matters of social sides to being a content creator, and my views on best practices using Twitter, and my views on scheduling, and my views on all those kinds of things, and like the appeal of thumbnails and whatever. Not that I'm an expert on any of this, and don't get me wrong, just because this series exists, it does not mean I think I'm an expert. To everyone listening right now and scratching their heads thinking, how full of himself is this guy? It was just something I did at one point, and I think I've got some insights. Whether they're worthwhile insights or not, I have insights to share. And yeah, there are some potential additions there. I'm a bit weird, though. With a series like that, I think I produced that entire series in one day. I think I spoke so much in that one day that my throat went raw, and I was like talking for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I edited it all and rendered it all like over the next day or 2. So like proper busted it all out. So maybe I'll have one of these crazy like hyper spurs, or where I want to work, and I'll chunk a ton of those out again, because there are some topics. I just don't know exactly when that might be. As always, these things are a little unpredictable. Marcus says, "Hey WP, did you do the old raids with the new elite specs? What did you think about those new builds for Scourge and Firebrand? Did you try a Weaver build? And if so, what did you spec? Do you mean what did I think? Or do you mean how did I run the Weaver?" Actually, I have not, even now, and there's been 3 raiding sessions since the expansion came out. I have not played a single Path of Fire elite spec in those raids. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. One is I never had stuff set up. And I want to play stuff slowly. I don't want to just rush get builds. It's been a bit unfortunate. As much as I love him and as much as I love doing the series with him, quite unfortunately, I've got like 2 characters now that have suddenly rushed their elite specs because of Boot's bad builds, and I needed to get them so that we could do the videos. But generally speaking, I don't like rushing them. And I've wanted to very gradually unlock those elite specs and really learn them so it really sticks in my head and I really know like what each trait is instead of just getting in a big load and then immediately, you know, character selecting and not going back on it for ages. And I don't really understand the elite spec as well as I understand the core aspects of that profession, if you get what I mean. So that's been a part. Another part has been I really enjoy the builds I play right now. I love playing Condi Rev on Backwarg. I think it's super fun. And, you know, that's just one example. Most times that I'm raiding most of the encounters, I have like a specific tech build for that environment in my group, and it's fun. And I like doing that. And so then when you add a bunch of new elite specs, they're not necessarily best in slot for those roles that I play, like tanking at Demos. Maybe I could theory craft a cool new Path of Fire based Demos flak kiter, but I haven't thought of that right now, and it's not set up. All of that said, though, I am going to be raiding my next set of raids. I am going to be using a Path of Fire spec. I actually want to play Condi Mirage. So one of my favorite builds recently has been Power Mesmer, which is like Phantasm based. And the Mirage build, the Condi build, is incredibly similar. It's just instead of swordsman, you're using pistols. And instead of spamming mantras, you're more likely to be spamming dodges and just some slightly different stuff and jaunts. And I want to do that. I was actually at one point playing on my Power Mesmer, and a Condi Mirage was in the group too, and they were hitting a lot harder, and that was a good enough motivation for me to get in there and maybe try something else. As for Firebrand, especially, Firebrand in my group has been dominating. You know, we've had Firebrands hitting so much harder than other DPS, and of course it was all pretty easy to get through the encounters anyway before this, so it's not like you have to run those new absurdly strong specs, and you might get a bit of penis envy looking at yourself on the DPS meter so much lower than a Firebrand. But it has been interesting to see how strong they are. I haven't really raided with anyone playing a very competent Scourge right now. I don't think. Maybe on one of them, but it never really struck me and stuck out in my memory right now. But yeah, so first one I'll be doing is a Mirage, and very soon. Next question is from Ethan S. Baird, who says, I know it's kind of an obvious question, but how do you feel about the addiction of the secret mount and its super speed? I tend to think it's amazing, but are we going to miss something significant because of it in the long run? What do you mean? In future content, everybody's speeding around on the Griffin so that it's, you know, it's bypassing all of these meaningful experiences? I think that is a fear, and I think that the developer comments about the implementation of the Griffin that they expressed on the live stream absolutely do not address that. It's actually kind of scary, because the way that they talked about putting it in, it seems like they never considered a lot of different things, but I will bow to the fact it's fun for now. Someone on a stream recently compared it to a Ritlock quote: short-term gains, meaning long-term problems. Anyone who's a fan of MMOs will be familiar with this thing where you add a flying mount, and I know this isn't a flying mount, but it's a good comparison to make, where you add a flying mount, and everybody loves it, and it's super fun, and then like a month or two later, people realize it's actually terrible for the game, and then eventually, you know, there has to be action taken against that kind of thing. So the question is the Griffin far enough in that direction? It may not be permanently able to fly, but it does have these obscene speeds and so forth. I don't really, even in this video where I'm going to try and give people as lengthy answers as possible, I don't feel confident putting my hat in on this conversation just yet, because I haven't used enough of the Griffin yet, and I think that whatever I say, first of all, as a criticism of myself, I know would not be particularly informed, but also people don't want to hear. If they're a massive fan of the Griffin, and I, you know, come out expressing all these doubts and stuff, and I haven't used as much of it as them, they're going to get very annoyed with me. So let's just leave it, and I'll come back to it later. But I understand the insecurity about it, and I think that people should be insecure about stuff like that. They should, no matter how fun it is, and we'll have a critical eye. That's all. Ada has 3 questions. They say take your pick. I'll just go through all of them, and we'll do it quickly. Has there been any new information on Shod? Does the Thorman overreact have anything to do with the new Rift or current events? Why would Leyline normally have Mystic Coins? Are Mystic Coins somehow tied with magic powers, and is that why Zomoros loves them so much? And if there was in-game food that you could eat in real life, what would it be? Seaweed salad, roasted aloe seed? Right, so for question 1 about Shod, so if people don't remember, Shod is the Asura that we meet with the Infinity Ball storyline. No, there's not any new information about Shod. If they ever touch that again, which I get, they probably get the sense from the community that the community wants them to touch again. Whether it was originally written as just like this fun story that wasn't supposed to have more meaning, they now see that the community is really a big fan of it, and maybe they understand where that comes from and they want to do it. I think if they ever do touch on Shod, though, it will probably be when there's a more Asuran-centric content batch coming in, like an Asuran-centric, or an Asuran-leaning, I should say, actually. I don't think we'll ever find a centric product, but an Asuran-leaning expansion. And, you know, that could be where Dodger comes back. But I didn't see any new information about Shod in POF. But again, I've still got a lot to digest about POF. Maybe there's something in there. I would suggest it's unlikely, though. As for leyline anomalies like in Mystic Coins and the connection with Zomoros there, I think that maybe there's something in that. But rather than that being some deep lore thing to speculate against, I think probably what happened is this. The current events team saw that they were adding these anomalies, and they were, you know, people become anomalies when they go right next to the Mystic Forge, and they were looking at some meaningful rewards, and they heard from the economist, John Smith, and his team. They heard that Mystic Coins, maybe a couple more syncs would be nice to go into the game. Not because that there actually needed to be more supply of Mystic Coins, but just as an attempt to burst the bubble that players have created around Mystic Coins. And so they thought, yeah, there's a bit of a thematic tie here, let's put coins in there. I think that's probably what happened, if anything. They may, or it's a complete coincidence, and it was purely about bursting the bubble. But yeah, I like the little connection you've managed to make there. And then finally, a food. Well, listen, this is a boring answer, but it is the only logical answer, okay? It's obviously anything Om-Nom Berry related. An Om-Nom Berry, okay? Delicious is in the name. If you're going to sample a Tyrian food, it has to be something Om-Nom Berry related, with fresh cream and cake and sugar and chocolate and early onset diabetes. Moving on, Jesse Jenkins says, first post on this site, woot! I just wanted to pick your brain about a few mount-related things. Apologise in advance for the length of this question, I got a bit excited. So first, you have mentioned that you think Living World Season 4 will involve more mounted combat, and while I think that's probably a safe bet, I was wondering what form you think it suits its format. The Mastery line in Season 3 was just that, one Mastery line. Do you think this suggests that we will be limited to one new mount in Season 4 with impactful and meaningful masteries, like the Griffin masteries feel most like this of the Path of Fire mounts in my opinion, or would you rather have a new mount for each new map we get? For what it's worth, I think if we ever got to an area with underwater content, I would love to have a mount that could be used both underwater and on ground, something like an otter perhaps. Oh, you know, I'd never thought of an amphibious mount. You're right as well, and I should have, because if you think of the skimmer, that's sort of an amphibious creature in some respects. So yes, I think that Season 4 will give us a mount. You used the word mounted combat there. I don't actually think that Season 4 should give us a mount that continuously unlocks combat abilities until it gets to the point that at the end of the season, we have a full skill bar. I think that that is dangerous. I think the idea of completely replacing regular combat and allowing people to just fight on mount with mount skills is a bad idea. However, the idea that you can have a co-op mount where one person drives and someone else is firing spells and arrows and stuff off of the side of it, I think that where it uses actual profession skills, and you're using, you know, you're a warrior with a rifle riding side seat on an elephant, right? Okay. I think that's alright, and I think that that can work because that's still elite specializations and regular specializations and runes and sigils and everything still that we love about Guild Wars combat. So I think that that could work, and maybe some kind of mastery that slowly unfolds your regular skill bar despite the fact you're mounted could also be a thing. But then there's special action hotkeys to think about too. Masteries can do a lot of stuff. You could essentially have, look at like the bouncing mushrooms and the adrenal mushrooms. They could genuinely, in Season 4, copy-paste that. Except that you have to be on a mount to eat the mushrooms. So, in this patch, we teach our elephant to eat mushrooms. And now we teach our elephant to eat this kind of mushroom. And now we've taught our elephant to no longer be scared of mice. So we can travel through the swamps of mice, which are in the south of the continent. You know, like, there's so many arbitrary ways that they could improve this. I used the word arbitrary there, but meaningful ways, I actually think. They've got so much opportunity. But that idea, that core idea of every patch, we bond a bit more with our mount, I love. And, you know, before Path of Fire, they kind of played up this idea that the mounts themselves were going to be a part of the story. And, you know, lots of NPCs would be talking about our raptor and our whatever and whatever. That wasn't as strongly delivered as I had the impression of. I think that's quite a magical, really cool idea. You know, we've all played these video games where you really bond with your animal companion. My first big experience of that was Fable 2, I think it was, with the dog, right? We've all had this, and so the thought that in Season 4, there's actually a lot of story revolving around this creature that we've got, and it's getting stronger as we go along. I like all of that. When we do go into that angle, though, there's also kind of a weird thing of like, isn't that what Aureen's supposed to be, this animal companion that we're bonding with and stuff? And Aureen is absolutely going to be a mount, in my opinion. So it's all curious. The other amazing thing to think about with this as well is we didn't just get one new mastery line throughout 2016 and 2017. We didn't just get one. We got two, because we got the Living World Season 3 mastery line, which potentially will be a mount we train with, as I've already discussed. But we also got a raiding mastery line, didn't we? And so the next release is looking to be some kind of raid. So I love the idea that we don't just have one mount on the horizon right now. What if we have two mounts on the horizon? And this idea of a co-op mount, a big, thing like a giant rhino, a Nuktuka or something. What if that is actually a raiding thing? And the idea of us riding side seat on an elephant in a co-op way, a 10-man mount, doesn't that work for 10-man content in the raids? Or, it's a 5-man mount and we have two, and we have like a replacement of the Spirit Wall encounter and stuff. The Heart of Thorns raids utilized gliding and some of those other masteries. Didn't utilize all of them, or well enough in my opinion, but it utilized them. Why wouldn't the new raid utilize mounts? And why wouldn't a new raid mastery altogether also have a mount? So we could have two on the horizon. That's the most optimistic road that we could go. Co-op one in the raids, and then like another single player one that we bond with in the open world. And then next we got, I apologize if this has been brought up before, but I think it would be a shame if nobody came to you with this idea, so here goes. I think I have an idea that uses ideas already incorporated into the game's core mechanics to complement the mastery system in regard to mounts in a way that adds some satisfying progression and possible further customization. I'm talking about mount armor. Now, I haven't thought this out thoroughly, and I would be glad to hear your thoughts on how this could be implemented, but I think the addition of mount armor could address some of the community's problems with mounts as of now, namely that they don't have enough progression, they die really fast, and that they don't have enough die channels. What if there was a way to either craft or create a time-consuming collection like Aurora to make cool-looking armor skins for the mounts? Personally, I think that making the armor defensive-based to give players who took the time to craft and collect the reward of not worrying about dying, but there are so many aspects that could be explored. Think about the racial mount armor, like Asuran Magitech on the Jackal, or Norn decorating the Springer as the Spirit of the Wild Hare. Think about mount armor giving runes, special bonuses. Overall, I just think this is a fun idea, and most importantly, the community can get really involved with ideas on this topic more than I can. Sorry for the rant. Yeah, so the essence of what you're saying, like the idea of putting more itemization and loot-based stuff with mounts, I really agree with. I think the mounts in Path of Fire were great, and I don't think it's a stretch to say they're one of the best, if not the best in some respects, implementations of mounts we've seen on the MMO scene. And I'm probably not the best qualified person to say that. But I think despite everything that's great about them and their animation and the way that the content was built for them and so on, I think that one thing that could have been pushed further is this itemization idea. Like the Aqua Breather for underwater content. You might say, oh, that's kind of a useless vestigial aspect of loot in Guild Wars 2 that they would delete if they could. But I say that it adds something, and I think that like a saddle slot in our inventory and mount armor as well, as you're talking about, I think that these are things that could have been added. I would say this idea as well of making your mount tankier with armor, I'm not sure how much I enjoy. I think that there's a good balance of you getting knocked off of your mount sometimes. I don't think it's a reasonable criticism to say that they're too squishy. I think it's good that sometimes you get kicked off and you fight whatever kicked you off and then you get back on. Yes, it can be a little bit frustrating, but I think it's an important kind of pace breaker to the experience. And I also like that the devs can play with some mounts being tankier than others. This idea of a big elephant style thing, it would be a tanky mount, innately tanky mount. And you can confuse those ideas when you add an armor system. But yeah, like mount-based runes and stuff, all of this is exciting to me. I do like it. You've also blended this entire thing in with an aesthetic side as well. And what I would say to that is that's very idealistic and lovely and wonderful. But let's face it, if they did that, in-game earnable armors that change the appearance of the mount and stuff, all that does is it serves to undermine the desire for the player base to buy gem store-based skins. And I think that gem store based skins can be such a ridiculous cash cow for ArenaNet. It could be really good for the game. It could lead to more hirings and all kinds of stuff. I don't know, obviously. But I think that just looking at the way that outfits were handled, looking at the way that gliding skins were handled, looking at all of that stuff, I think, let's face it, it's going to be on the gem store. And what you're asking for is not going to happen with the aesthetic angle, as great as all of that is. Moving on, we got Scar, who says, "Hey WP, first in Liverworld Season 3, they seem to be hinting that Lissa was somehow involved with Balthazar having a mirror enchanted by her, even selling it in the gem store. But as far as I could tell, there was nothing about that in Path of Fire. Any idea why they might be going with it, or do you think they just forgot about that little detail altogether?" Well, Scar, I know I've given everyone full answers here, but I did an entire video just about that. After you posted this comment, so I'm really sorry that it feels like I'm skipping over you, but look on my channel. Honestly, there's a huge video just about that, and you can pretend, my friend, that I wrote that entire 20-minute video is for you. That's my response to your question. Do apologize. Kerry Williams says, "Hey WP, quick question regarding adventures. I know you talked a lot about your initial dislike for the non-Griffin Path of Fire adventures, and I agree. They're a bit meh and quite easy. They're a fair contrast to the Heart of Thorns ones, which I mostly enjoyed, and I still can't get gold on all of. How have you found the Path of Fire Griffin adventures, if you've done any? They might not add any new specific mechanics or skills, but they definitely seem challenging. I just spent 20 minutes getting gold on one in the Highlands, and I kept shaving off 0.2 seconds of my time each run until hitting the gold mark. Thoughts on these compared to the Heart of Thorns ones? And do you think that they make up for the rather boring supply runs, despite them being, in a way, very mechanically similar? I'm really sorry, but I haven't played any of the Griffin adventures yet." They look great though, and I love the idea of what they stand for and like the mastery of the Griffin, because there is that does seem to tie together very well in my mind, the idea of those being adventures. Hopefully that kind of picks up the slack of what the ground-based ones were. But yeah, I think I wanted a bit more variety in the adventures, even with those Griffin ones in mind and what I've seen of them and what I know of them. I had a really fun while on some streams playing Heart of Thorns right before Path of Fire came out, where I was getting gold on all of the stuff that I'd missed. And it was really fun going back. It was fun playing as the giant robot again, and it was fun getting my flamethrower and blowing up Chak, and it was fun learning that crazy one where you're grabbing all the totems. And I think Path of Fire lost out by not having such wild experiences as that in its adventures. They also never really made use of action cam, did you notice? Which I think is a bit of a shame. Ales Thieves says, "Hey WP, I'm enjoying the expansion a lot, and I think Path of Fire's storytelling has been ArenaNet's best so far. I disliked, however, the treatment of the gods, only made worse by the childish attitude of the community when it comes to Cormyr... It seems the devs are making very clear that we should not expect the human gods to be part of the story in the future, but this development seemed rushed and unsatisfactory. I understand it is difficult to write the gods into the story, as they easily become a deus ex machina that at any point can solve problems better and faster than the player characters. I think, however, that getting away entirely from the gods is a huge thematic loss for the Guild Wars 2 lore, and it seems to invalidate a huge portion of the human culture. The gods are interesting because they are ambivalent, benevolent but distant, wise but mysterious, attached to humanity but sometimes harsh and imperscrutable. I don't think I've ever heard that word in my life. The parables of the gods in Siren's Landing are a perfect example of this. To keep this thematic potential in the story, I would have much preferred the gods to remain with a subtle but active involvement. Cormyr directing the hero through a prophecy, Lissa being ambiguous about her stance and speaking in riddles, Melandru going on to an oasis in the desert to disappear again, etc. Do you agree? What is your perspective on how the gods were dealt with in Path of Fire and their lack of place in future stories? I'm not settled with how I feel about how the gods were handled in Path of Fire. Yes, I've already mentioned in this video, I think they were a bit too hands-off with it, and I think that they were a little bit scared to give us like more details and stuff. However, I can agree with the writers not wanting them to be a major part of the story, and that seems to be what you're arguing for as well. You don't want them to be a major part of the story, you just don't want them in it fully. But with the idea of the 5 races and how much it's really important to focus on them and how much we really could have expected, I think this is almost par for the course. I think that they didn't do Cormyr quite as well as they could have. And you're right, the community does annoy me to an extent that just because that meme video exists online joking about Cormyr being useless, it's become like fact to people somehow. And she wasn't useless in Nightfall. She was not useless in Nightfall. And it's become such a common thing to joke about. People forget that it's a joke now. And I see it a lot. People love ragging on Comet. Maybe it's not a problem that people love ragging on Comet. Maybe that's a fun part of the community, and maybe it's something we should cherish. But yes, I think given what they did with Path of Fire, I wanted more from the gods. More contact, more information, more tangible stuff happening. But all they really did was retread old ground. So let's go into that side of things as well. You might make the argument that Path of Fire didn't do anything wrong, because the world we live in Guild Wars 2 post Path of Fire with regard to the gods is the same as pre Path of Fire, is the same as pre Living World Season 3. It's a world where the gods have left. What did we expect? The gods to come back? Why did they have to come back? Was Guild Wars 2 terrible this entire time leading up to this moment because the gods weren't in it? I don't know whether that's true. I think that mystery of why they left and what they've been doing, most of that's been preserved. And if you like that aspect of the world building before, you might be disappointed that they never really rocked the boat, but maybe the boat didn't need to be rocked. My answer's really vague and waffly here, and that's again because I'm not entirely sure how I feel about all of it. I do know in small ways I would have liked a little bit more. But to your opening statement as well, that Path of Fire seems to say there's going to be no more gods, get over it, it's done. I don't know fully, because it does feel like there's something going on with the Lissa thing. It does to me a little bit, just a little bit. So we'll see. And that was kind of a fundamental question I had thrown at me after making that video about Lissa too, is why are we talking about this? The gods are never going to be a thing. They're never going to be relevant again. Well, I guess Season 4 will answer that. It's amazing how we can constantly move the goalpost, right? It's brilliant. Rick Predella says, "Hey WP, I'm a big fan, thanks for your work. I wanted to ask about inventory wars. More often than not, whenever I get loot, I feel dragged down as it's just a waste of time more than a natural reward. Loot doesn't feel exciting at all. Not to mention having boxes inside boxes inside boxes. Of course, Path of Fire's improved this, but it still doesn't feel interesting to receive loot or handle it in the inventory. What are your thoughts on how to make loot actually fun and make managing inventory better and less of a nuisance?" So, I have some thoughts, none of them are solutions. My first thought is this, that people don't understand why loot is weird feeling in Guild Wars 2. And it's weird feeling in Guild Wars 2 because fundamentally 150 people can tag a single enemy and it will give loot to all 150 people. What happens with Guild Wars 2 is this. People come to the MMO and they see that there's no kill stealing, there's no loot tagging. I mean, there are in crazy scaled places and early game maps where you kill stuff before people can get tagged and stuff, but generally speaking, there's none of that. And they say, wow, this is so good, it's so obvious. Why did no other MMOs do this? Oh yes, amazing arena, and they like it. And then they forget that that's a part of the game, and they just enjoy it, and that's just Guild Wars 2 to them. And they take that, and that's mine, and that's the perk of playing Guild Wars 2, and it will always be this way, and I always like this. And then they go off in their happy little way. And what they don't realize 200 hours later, 1,000 hours later, is that little thing they understood and accepted ages ago and now have forgotten about, that has impacted their entire system in terms of how loot is distributed to players. And so then they get to the late game and they realize that there's loads of currencies, and they realize that crafting is a bit convoluted, and they realize that there's a lot of account bound stuff that they don't want to be account bound, and they realize that there's loads of stuff that can or cannot be deposited as materials, and there's all these weird little things, right? There's all these ideas that stuff isn't very flavorful. They realize that magic find doesn't work very well, and it's around now that they're like, oh, loot sucks in Guild Wars 2, and they don't realize that it's all bound together. Guild Wars 2's loot fundamentally works differently because they handle it differently to try and be like this big communal thing. And I think that on a fundamental level, that makes it more boring. And so they try to hammer out ways to make it interesting for us via collections and stuff, but it's always been a struggle with Guild Wars 2. So that's one perspective I have. I don't know what the fix is. I really don't. I miss meaningful loot. I play other RPGs where there's much more meaningful loot, and I enjoy it a lot more, but I don't know how Guild Wars 2 can end up having that. Then there's another side of things as well, that I also, it's just an observation, and it's something that I've been thinking on. The bigger a game gets, the longer a game exists, the more different people will play it, the more different experiences people will have, and the more variant we can feel about things. And one good example of this in Guild Wars 2, and there are many examples in Guild Wars 2, but is actually inventory management. And I think that there's a lot of veteran players out there now who have completely lost touch with what it means to be a new player with only one bank tab, with only 250 cap on their currency things, with no additional bag slots unlocked, with only 16 to 18 slot bags in each thing, with only one account bound slot which they got from buying the expansion. People in those situations for Inventory Wars 2 are playing a completely different game loot-wise to me. I might respond to you in this comment and say, yeah, salvage all, and you can open all these bags and unidentified gear, and it's all amazing, because that's how I feel. I feel that the Path of Fire loot is not interesting, really, no, but it's easy now, so I can get through it. I can just do a couple of right clicks, get through it, and just move on with my life, right? It's not interesting, but it's also okay that it's not interesting because I don't have to interact with it a lot. That's my opinion about Path of Fire. But my opinion about Path of Fire loot is based on the fact that, you know, I've got all these ridiculous bag slots and stuff. And so why this has been on my mind recently is not only do we have all those things I just gave you an example of, but also now there's like these ultra prestige 32 slot bags, which I'm going for and getting, right? And so how is my opinion going to really be relevant when I'm running around on a max unlocked, what is it, 256 slot inventory on my main and some of my other characters and stuff? It's a different game. And so, you know, this is just an observation I've made, and I wonder how that will impact the game as we go even further forward. Sorry I can't give you something more tangible as to a solution, because I don't know. Moving on, we have Kent, who says, this is an odd question. Hey WP, back in the original Guild Wars, something that always struck me was the amount of pop culture references in the various quests, such as Zin being inspired by Invader Zim, or the Halcyon quest chain from the Jade Sea being an homage to Firefly. From what I can tell, Guild Wars 2 has toned down the references drastically. How much do you think that tongue-in-cheek approach to storytelling and world building affected later efforts to build off of the world of Guild Wars going into Guild Wars 2? That's a very cool question. It's a very cool question. I would observe that the Guild Wars 2 community hates pop culture references. And I don't know whether that's because in this game we got a lot more voice acting, and there's kind of a thing in Guild Wars 2 where it's being asked to take itself a lot more seriously. There was so much pop culture reference in GW1. And I think GW1 got away with it because, again, as I've mentioned earlier in this video, many people won't believe me on this, but I swear to you it's true. People were not, on average, that fanatical about lore in the original game. They weren't. Your regular player was happy to see all these ridiculous pop culture references everywhere because it didn't matter to them whether the game took itself seriously or not. And it's so ironic to understand that and then also realize that all these Guild Wars 2 players lament the loss of the tone of the original, myself included, right? But it was full of these references. I think that it would be slammed hard, the sequel doing those. Now, that's not necessarily what you're asking. What you're asking is, was it hard to make Guild Wars 2's story meaningful and cohesive and serious when it's built on top of this, like, empire of pop culture references? You know, Zin was a seriously handled story in the Flashpoint release. But you look back at him originally and, you know, it's Office Space. They're talking about Office Space and Blim. So I think that that's one of the very few situations where that's really reared its head. The fact that there was like a Snake on the Plains reference in a quest in Corner, okay? Is that going to drag down Living World Season 4 as we go to Corner? I don't think so. I think a lot of those were so, like, fluffy and just tongue-in-cheek little jokes that they're easy to ignore now. And most of the time where we saw those pop culture references, they were in the way of, like, accepting a quest dialogue or declining a quest dialogue or the name of a quest rather than the actual NPCs themselves beyond perhaps their name. And sometimes it was the NPCs themselves, just like you're saying here with Zin, but mostly it wasn't. And I think that the devs can get away with it. I don't think they've been pussyfooting around that too much, but they could have been. And it's a really awesome thing to think about. And if people haven't played Guild Wars 1 and they're listening to this and you're thinking about playing Guild Wars 1, that's an interesting facet of the experience, I think, that will strike you, that people don't talk about much. And that's how much pop culture referencing there was going on. And not just pop culture referencing, by the way, but references to developers and developers' friends and developers' families and testing and all that kind of stuff. Again, very recently, I was talking about a guy in the wilderness of Bazda at the Citadel of Zagna who was talking about making a TV and planes and stuff. Can you imagine if in Guild Wars 2 had an NPC like that? There'd be like huge Reddit threads discussing it. In Nightfall, it was mostly just appreciated for what it was, a fun little joke. And maybe that's what they hoped when it came to Infinity Ball and stuff like that too. Anyway, I digress. Moving on, we got Ordamoro Gonzalez, who says, hey WP, love your work, long-time viewer, first-time commenter, it's nice to see you. He says, your video about the future of mounts, specifically your comments on racial skills, it got me thinking, what if the devs made a new branching racial elite skill mechanic? Let's call it mount conversion skill. for the sake of argument. Players have a choice. 1, to keep the vanilla racial skill with all of its pre-existing mechanics, or 2, get the new mount conversion skill. The general idea for the mount conversion skill would be as follows. The Asura get to move around inside their golem. The Norn can traverse the world in their animal spirit forms. Humans can ride a hound of Balthazar. Sylvari can ride a sylvan hound or maybe a druid spirit if it's not too weird. Since Char racial skills are either equips or minions, maybe they can get a motorcycle or an armed vehicle. This also opens the door for variants, each with its own sort of specialized role for travel, like speed, stealth, defense, or a mix of roles. Non-spirits fit this mold. I know that adding too much variety to the forms can be overwhelming and perhaps redundant, since new mounts could also be made to fit the different roles and expand their use to characters rather than specific race. I figure it's a cool way to repurpose a neglected mechanic, and it could provide players with a little more flavor. What do you think? Also, what's your favorite beer, either brand or style? Alright, so beer, I don't really have a favorite beer. I'm gonna put myself in a certain camp here. Probably the variety of beer that I've drank more than anything else is Carlsberg. I'll let that linger in the room for the UK people there. As to your thing, I appreciate that you've been very inspired by the mount system and different things that it can do. And I've been in that position before where I've been fallen in love with an idea in my mind that I think would be good for the game. But, I don't foresee the devs ever really looking at racial skills. Not anything as drastic as you're saying here, at least, before just acknowledging what racial skills are and what they're meant to be in the game first and foremost. And yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm going to be a real Debbie Downer on your suggestion here, but I think at the end where you say, other mounts can add that in the future, I think that they'll probably focus on that more than anything else. I like your ideas and your enthusiasm and inspiration, but I'm a bit too much of a cynic to expect big systems and stuff like this coming in the game, so I feel like that wins me a bit of my excitement when we talk about it. I'm sorry that you didn't really get a very good answer there. Because believe me, repurposing neglected mechanics, as you say, is something I'm very much in favor of. Corey Dulo says, with the Spud community growing so large that you need 2 guilds to contain all of its members, how do you prevent infighting or manage potential issues between members? This question comes from my experience in other guilds. In a different Guild Wars 2 streamers' guild, people were told basically by mods, not the streamer, that they weren't allowed to talk about NA raids in their Discord. In FF14, the leader simply kicked both members involved in some drama, and everything since then has been fantastic. In BDO, members were leaving the guild and actively attacking anyone still in the guild, both inside and outside of the game, for example, on Facebook. Yeah, it's funny to see how different guilds can have different cultures, right? I love that idea of kicking both people in a fight, because I am a big believer that if there's some kind of dispute, it's very easy on the internet to just ignore it exists and then it goes away. Usually when there is a fight, even if someone's being really unfairly harassed and aggressed, if they're biting back in guild chat in front of everyone, there is kind of a sense that you didn't have to do that. You could have just blocked them and moved on with your life. And we get into weird situations here of blaming victims and so forth, but like such a hardline stance is an interesting thing to look at. For me personally, when it comes to Spud, yes, we've grown a lot, but my perspective doesn't really change just because we're at 1,000 now rather than 500. I feel like there's a level, maybe somewhere around 200, where when you get to 200, a lot of the ways you deal with fostering and maintaining a community are now like set, and they're applicable like all the way up to like 10,000 or something ridiculous. So I'm not sure much has changed just because we've added a second guild. I always say, right, so if people don't know, I'm kind of the mascot of the guild, and I help people get in, and I interact with the guild, but mostly the community is run by the GMs, and they do a lot of the events, and they foster the community, and they make sure that things are okay. And there are questions, like how the quality of chat, and like how juvenile it is. Do we want constant sex jokes going on all the time, or do you want more informed discussion? Do you want it to feel like you're amongst a bunch of other mid-20-year-olds, or do you want to feel like you're amongst a bunch of 13-year-olds? And I do believe very heavily in strict moderation and being very hands-on on these things. On my YouTube comments, I'm always very hands-on. I make sure that, or I try to make sure that particularly tacky and unnecessary and shitty comments keep away so that the YouTube comments can feel good. And that's one of the things I'm quite proud of. So I always do a lot of that on my end on YouTube. As for the GMs, I always tell them, you know, they have my complete trust in being as hardline as they want. If they want to kick someone, then they can kick someone. And I'm always more likely to side with them because I know that what they really care about is the integrity and the strength of the community rather than the specifics of whatever dispute may be going on, if you get what I mean. And that's not to say there aren't exceptions, but yeah, I think if people really knew me and really understood some of my perspectives on this stuff, you'd realize I'm quite a hard man. I'm quite a zero tolerance man, and you know, I'll empower the GMs to do what they need to do to have a good experience there. At the same time, though, I also accept that I am not that my perspective on what is a good community or not is not the be all and end all for Spud. So mostly I leave that in their hands. If they prefer that it's like a ton of 13-year-olds as opposed to a ton of 20-year-olds, or a ton of 30-year-olds or whatever. And I know I'm generalizing with age, and this is kind of a tacky thing to do. But if they prefer, you know, a community that's not quite my idea of a community, but that's what they're really enjoying, at this point, I would say, you know, that's for them to decide, and I wouldn't actually force my way into that, and I wouldn't tell them, oh, you have to run things very, very differently. So I think what we've got is working out reasonably well. I think that you've got to keep an eye on things very closely. Oh god, I wish this wasn't at the end of an hour-long discussion because I could be talking a lot more specifically about stuff. Amazing to hear your other experiences. I wonder what specific story you would have about Spud to add to that list. Because we've had our share of people who have had to be kicked. Not many, not very often, but it's happened. Second to last here, we have Ian Freeman Lee, who says, howdy WP. Do you think the fact that Kraukatoric flew south implies that all of the story for Season 4 will be taking us south? Or is there room for us to jump around like Season 3? I, like yourself, really love seeing the map get revealed, and I'd hate to think that we won't get some more of the non-Elonian regions for the foreseeable future. Yeah, there's a lot of questions about how they could deal with that map. One giant map that's corner that slowly unfogs, or more than that. If we think of Path of Fire as being 5 episode releases, and especially if we factor in that Season 4 could be longer because they have no content drought or whatever, I think that, yeah, there's a lot of space for them to add stuff, and now much bigger maps too. So the idea of adding little maps like Bloodstone Fen style sections is now less likely to me. So what are we looking at? The entire Deljamore front being added in a single map? That was something that always used to really excite me. Could we get that? I think we could. Could we get corner? I think we could as well. It's just that now that there's mounts, it's like there needs to be a lot of space, it feels like, almost. Or maybe they can get... Do you guys think... So I'll throw this back on the comments here. Do you guys think that just because we have mounts and all this movement speed and the Griffin and stuff, a map like Bloodstone Fen, the size of Bloodstone Fen, can't be added in Season 4? Or can it? And can they get away with that? And so next we've got Christopher, who says, last of all, is there any precedent for law for waypoints? They acknowledge that they exist in Season 2 when Mordremoth starts tangling them, but when it comes to storytelling, they act like they don't exist. They talk about all the time it took to travel to places, like when they did the summit at the Grove. So are they just a dorky gameplay mechanic, or are they really lore for them? Yeah, I don't like the way they were implemented. I think they should be an animation, some visual effect for traveling, some sort of 10-minute cooldown, something, anything. A 10-minute cooldown on waypoints? You're not talking about lore anymore, dude. You're talking about mechanics. Anyway, I think that they should never have touched on waypoints in Season 2. Even within Season 2, as you've rightly pointed out there, they're both talking about waypoints, but they're not going the whole hog. I think that they always should have just been a mechanic. It's like them saying... you know, having Bram say, oh, let me unequip this trait so that I'm no longer Dragon Hunter specialized because I've moved on from my mother's death. You know, it's just, they didn't need to do it, in my opinion. Now, they do justify some stuff. Like, I think the idea of Path of Fire is that the Priory and stuff went there a little bit earlier than us and then interacted with all the races and set up a ton of waypoints. Could have been the idea. Obviously, they never expressly say it. I think that, you know, they've dug themselves a bit of a hole, but I think this is a hole they can dig their way out of by just never acknowledging it again, never talking about it. It's not an interesting subject to me. I don't think it was that interesting of a subject to players. It didn't need to be touched on. I think it was a mistake. And yeah, so we can say that they exist in world. If you were to walk up to a random Tyrian who was standing next to a waypoint, he would look up and say, yeah, that's an Asuran device for fast travel. But beyond that, I think the rest of it would be hazy, and we don't need details. This is the MMO video game storytelling equivalent of that Jimmy Carr joke about jokes, which is what analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Very few people are interested, and the frog dies. And I think that's true about the waypoints too. So there you go, guys. That's the super Q&A. Thanks very much for watching. Anyone who got to the end of this is an absolute trooper. We will be doing another one of these very soon. So if you liked this, if you're interested in this, and you do want to consider supporting on Patreon, you can get in on the next one and a ton of other perks like early access videos and that behind the scenes series and stuff I talked about. There's a link at the top of the description. You can be signed up in just a couple of seconds, really. And anyone who does join really does kind of become a part of a life-changing thing for me. So thank you very much to anyone who listened to this, anyone who was considering supporting, those of you who submitted your questions. Next week we'll do a regular Q&A, and then we'll look at trying to do another super one very soon. So thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope to see your questions on that, and I'll be back very shortly for more good stuff. Have a good evening, guys.